Well, I don't really know quite what to say about that. I just watched Orphan 55, and I've got to do a review on this episode, and I don't really feel like I have anything much to say about it. So this should be interesting. Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video where I'm here today to review Orphan 55 episode 3 of series 12 of Doctor Who that is literally just aired. It finished about, 10 minutes ago for me, so it's very fresh in my mind, and I'm going to try and give you guys my thoughts and opinions and feelings on this episode of what I can try and muster. Let me know down in the comments below right now what you thought of this episode, and hopefully I'll be able to compile them into my What Did the Fans Think video that will come up again later in the week. I love to hear your guys' thoughts on this episode, just any little details you picked out, and what you enjoyed about it, what you disliked about it, whether you thought it was awful or great. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it in the comments below. But yes, so this episode, I think probably it'll help me more than anything else by just kind of walking through a bit of what this episode was about. So initially it was some sort of, well, they call it Tranquility Spa, so a kind of holiday destination seemingly in space, some random planet with a holiday sort of a destination that they'd all won free tickets to go and enjoy, have a nice time, chill out and whatever. But then there seems to be some mysterious creatures that are breaking into this place, basically, that we don't know quite what they are. Then we find out that this place is actually just a little bubble on another world that's been packed in there when it's not supposed to be. Then they go on a whole long adventure being chased, well, trying to find this old dude who's blatantly been caught by the dregs, and then is basically just trying to escape the dregs and get back to where they were in the first place so that they could teleport away from it to finish the episode. So it was kind of a bit of a round in a circle, not that much happening kind of episode, but it also felt like there was lots happening because it felt very sort of action orientated. I think throughout this episode it was very kind of high energy. It felt at least like there was a lot going on, but also like nothing consequential ever actually happened. And there are things I do like about this episode. I liked the kind of slight twist that this episode is actually set on Earth and a futuristic Earth. I'll come on to the other issues with that in a minute. But the fact it was set on Earth I thought was quite a fun twist that wasn't really expected. Part of me was sort of a little bit unconvinced when they got down into these sort of tunnels and these sewers. I was like, these don't really convince me as particularly alien planet tunnels. Like, these feel very much like Earth underground tunnels, almost sort of, yeah, just like Earth underground tunnels. And obviously it turned out they actually were, and so that kind of made sense. So I was kind of slightly satisfied with myself, shall I say, that I felt like I kind of guessed it beforehand. That's what it was going to be, a futuristic version of Earth. But yes, let's talk about what I'm sure will be the most talked about and controversial point about this episode for the whole week before episode 4 airs, which is this whole topic of climate change and how humans are not making good enough decisions about the environment and trying to help save the environment, that we're going to end up like the dregs and on this desolate planet that's all radioactive and everything, and that's how our Earth is going to end unless we're better people. Is, I think, the pretty on-the-nose message of this story. Like, up until that point, very, very late in the episode, it feels like it's just a kind of disaster movie style episode with various characters getting killed off in this sort of large main cast as we go through, being chased by some alien menace that's just some sort of savage beast on this radioactive destroyed planet, basically, and that they're just being chased by that, and that's all it's about. And that, to an extent, I think would have been fine. It would have been pretty average and bog standard, and it felt like there's got to be something more than just they're running away from the dregs. Like, it's not really that great in terms of plot. But then suddenly we end up going straight into, oh no, this is Earth, and it's Earth because of climate change and global warming, and we haven't looked after the planet, and therefore it's been destroyed and ruined, and our people, the human race, have evolved into these dregs. I do like the name, I must say. I like the name dregs, the last dregs of humanity, as it were. I think is quite a nice, it sort of makes so much sense when you think about it, so I like that. But then I just don't quite understand the end of this episode, from the Doctor doing this bizarre speech to camera, basically, just waffling on and giving us basically a lecture about how we need to look after the planet better. We need to be the best of humanity. Like, she's talking to the companions, but she's basically talking to camera and talking to the audience and giving us a lecture about climate change and about how we need to look after the planet better, otherwise we'll end up like this terrible planet and turn into these terrible creatures. And I'm like, Doctor Who, I have nothing wrong with it being political. I don't think that's a bad message to send. I think it's true. I think it's factual. I think that we do need to look after our planet better, and that's important. I just don't think that they did it in the right way in this episode. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing an episode that sort of highlights that as an issue. I think the only real problem was just that ending, was just the way that the Doctor gives such a kind of direct, on-the-nose speech to camera about how we're terrible at looking after the Earth and that we need to do better as a planet, as a people. And it just felt too much. Like, I don't like to talk about how Doctor Who's getting too political and all that sort of rubbish, because I don't think generally that it is. But that moment, that end of episode speech that just felt so uncalled for, when she's like, if we look after our planet, then we'll be okay, or cut to the Dregs, so that's that implying we're going to turn into Dregs and all be dying in a destroyed planet if we don't improve and be better. And I'm like, there's a good message in there. I don't feel they did it in the right way. I don't feel they did it in a way that is not going to just go, well, look at Doctor Who, they're just being political, they're just shouting at us and certain things. And I can kind of see that in this episode, unfortunately, which is a real shame. Because I did have really, really high hopes for this story. It's written by Ed Heim, who wrote It Takes You Away in Series 11, which is probably my favourite episode of Series 11 for just the interesting concepts and wacky ideas of the story and it kind of twisting and changing a bit. And you can see little bits of that in there, obviously the twist midway through with it being set on Earth. But apart from that, it just feels very much like a filler episode. I think that's all that often is the problem with mid-series episodes, and after coming off this big two-part, quite arc-heavy to an extent, opener with the Master and setting up so many plot strands to go forward, to then have an episode like this where the only real reference to the last episodes and the ongoing arc is, I think Yaz says, oh, the Doctor, maybe this will cheer the Doctor up a bit because she's a bit grumpy, and then she's going, no, I'm not. So it's kind of reminding us briefly that she's unhappy because of the whole Gallifrey situation, but also just then completely disregarding it, forgetting it. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but then it can sometimes make episodes feel quite inconsequential and pointless and like this. I think that's just what encapsulated this episode. There was a lot of characters in there, some of them who I don't feel like really needed to be in there, had any point to being in there, frankly. Like James Buckley's character, the two green-haired dudes, the James Buckley, and I can't remember the child's name. Was it Silas or something like that? Honestly, I can't remember all the characters' names. But those two, they kind of felt completely superfluous to the plot. They had nothing to really do with the plot. They were just kind of tagging along, as you sometimes get in disaster movies. A kind of character on the side doesn't really have much to do and somehow wiggles way through everything and survives it, and that's kind of it. And then we had sort of bizarre character moments that I don't felt like were kind of earned through the story. So, for example, the stuff with Ryan and I can't even remember her name, the woman who turned into a kind of rebel who was kind of flirting with Ryan and things. That whole storyline kind of, it had its funny moments and it had its kind of awkward moments when the Doctor goes and sits down in between the two of them when they're having a kind of deep conversation, and little things like that. That was kind of good, but then it just kind of fizzles out into nothingness, and then suddenly they just kiss and say goodbye, and that's the end of the episode. It was just a bit bizarre in the way it was all set up. I think it wasn't really focused on very well. Then the old couple we had, Benny and Vilma, I think it was. Benny obviously was dead pretty quickly. Then Vilma just had sort of, after being a sort of fairly neutral character, had this just weird moment of I'm gonna stop you guys, I'm gonna attack you, you can come and get me kind of moment, which was just again a bit bizarre, and I guess it kind of makes sense, but yeah, it didn't really do it for me particularly. It just felt like there were too many characters that they were trying to kind of write parts into, which then left characters like Yaz, as we often seem to say, with not very much to do in the story, as at least I felt was the case once again in this episode. I think the character of the sort of captain of the crew, I honestly can't remember her name, was it Kate or something like that? I really cannot remember. She was a weird kind of really, really mean villain who suddenly then meets her daughter that she didn't realise was her daughter and suddenly changes. She then seemingly is killed and then just randomly turns back up at the end for apparently no reason, and she can somehow defeat the Dregs. It was all a little bit bizarre, and I didn't quite follow exactly what was going on there and why. She just seems like a completely horrible and contemptible person for most of this episode, which is, I mean, fair enough. And kind of is, at least, guess painting her almost as the villain of the piece, but also the Doctor having to try and help her and deal with her as part of this whole crew. But yeah, then suddenly seeming like she's dead, and then she's not, and then it's all over. And yeah, it was just a bit bizarre, a bit of a sort of off-pace ending, I think. Now, I'm being quite negative about this episode. Like, I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was awful. I didn't think that, like, it's the worst episode the show's ever done or whatever. It does definitely feel like a letdown from the previous episodes. Just naturally with the scale of what we saw there to this, it was always going to be a little bit of a letdown. And I didn't really have many expectations going into it. I wasn't expecting it to be bad or expecting it to be good. I kind of was just neutral. Let's just see what it's like. And I did like the initial setup, the initial idea of them being in this sort of holiday spa. It's quite a very visually appealing, a very nice looking place. I think they used a sort of similarly designed place as the sort of place used in a lot of Smile in Series 10. So it kind of gives us a slightly similar vibe in that sense, which I think worked quite well. And then so a lot of the settings, it felt like the episode was reasonably kind of pacing through and rushing through quite quickly. Lots of action moments. The actual Drakes as villains themselves and sort of creepy monsters, I thought were really, really effective. They were properly kind of serious presences on screen. They were very, very tall. They looked very sinister and monstrous. And like I think they were filmed and directed very, very well to kind of build up that sense of how kind of powerful and devouring these creatures are, essentially. So I thought on that side of things, it worked really, really well. And there was a fair amount of good stuff in there. It just felt like as a whole package, it was kind of a bit of a letdown. And then that speech at the end just kind of nailed it on as not good. So yes, I don't like to generally be too negative about Doctor Who, but unfortunately this isn't one of the greatest episodes the show has ever done, shall we say. It's not awful. I don't think it's bad as the Saranga Conundrum or the Battle of Ranskorath Koloss, or some from Series 11, for example, and lots of other episodes in the past. It's not awful. It's just kind of okay, solid. I'm not really going to remember it with a kind of slightly annoying ending to it. It's probably the best way to sum it up. But I want to hear from you guys. As I said, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this episode, whether you enjoyed it or not. If you agree with me, if you completely disagree and think it was amazing, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments below. But I hope you enjoyed this quick little review of Orphan 55. I'll be back again very soon for another brand new video. So as always, hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for another one. Goodbye.